They gave us a choice. Do I want to go home and wait for labor before delivering her? Or do I want to have the C-section now? And it was, for me, it was a no-brainer. I needed to get her out now because I wanted to hold her. I just needed to hold my baby girl. And, part of me is thinking, oh, maybe they could save her, but I know realistically that's not true, but I just needed to hold her and look at her. So now the one thing you should know is once you've been given that bad news in a doctor's office, there's actually a back door. I never noticed it before in all the times that I went for my appointments, and trust me, I was there a lot. But that day, after we had decided we're going to have the C-section, I was walking through the hallway to go out through the front, the normal way that I would go to leave. And the nurse kind of gently pushes me in a different direction. And there's a door that I've never seen before, and that's the way that I'm exiting. And it almost felt like it was a walk of shame. I understand why there's a back door. Because who wants to see a hysterical mom who just found out that she lost her baby walk through the lobby where there are other pregnant women waiting, happy pregnant women that have no care in the world at this point, that still have a chance. So I get it. My doctor's office, the medical building that it's in, was actually attached to the hospital where I was scheduled for the C-section anyway. So we had to navigate that long walk from the medical building to the hospital, and we made it to the maternity ward. And who knew that I would have to sit there bawling my eyes out, doing paperwork before they can put me in a hospital room. There are other pregnant women checking in because they're giving birth. They've gone into labor, and there I am at that desk, just bawling my eyes out when I see these women with huge smiles on their faces because they get to meet their babies for the first time. And I'm over there mourning the death of mine. It sucked. It really did. I also know that it was probably jarring for them to see me, huge, ready to pop, bawling my eyes out, signing paperwork to get admitted in the hospital. And that could only mean one thing. It's common sense. You see something like that, something went wrong. And I felt guilty and ashamed at the same time, jealous and angry. But I felt guilty that I was ruining their moment, their happy moment, because I was busy mourning my sad moment. So then I finally get a room. We've notified family, and a lot of people are just shocked. That's not a phone call that you expect every day. Most people are expecting a phone call saying, hey, it's time, the baby's coming, instead of, we lost the baby and we're in the hospital waiting to have a C-section. That's absurd. That's not what you would normally expect to hear. And my parents and my brother and his wife, they were actually in Canada at the time, visiting my grandmother and my aunt. And as soon as they were notified, because we told my sister, we let her notify the family, and my husband called his mom and let her notify his side of the family. And I actually didn't know. As soon as they heard, they packed up and they got in the car and they drove straight to the hospital. So by the time I was admitted into the hospital, it must have been noon. And the hours kept passing and passing, even though they said, we'll have the C-section around 2. And 2 o'clock rolls around and still nothing. And my family's showing up. my cousins and my sister, they're just showing up, and my my mother-in-law's there, and they're all just trying to show some support for me. And we're all taking turns crying, but most of the time it was like I had zoned out. There were times that I was just laying down in the hospital bed, while the family's there waiting for the C-section, and I felt numb. I wasn't really interacting with anyone. I had no words. It's like everything had been taken from me at that point. And I'm just sitting there, like, thinking about nothing. As the family comes in, the family leaves. At one point, my cousin flagged a nurse saying it's 5 o'clock. We were supposed to have the C-section at 2, and I'm zoned out. But it's like I heard what the nurse said, and what she said pissed me off. Well, not really pissed me off, but I definitely saw red. And he said, "I'm sorry, but there are other pregnant women that came that need emergency C-sections, and they're priority." And it really stung, and it really hit me, but it just really solidified the reason why they're priority and I wasn't. It's because they had a chance at a living baby while I didn't, so they could just leave me in the hospital room for hours and hours waiting for my turn. And I understand why, but in that moment it doesn't make you feel any better. By 8 o'clock, my water broke. Of course, my water broke. If everything had been fine and dandy, this would have been the day that she would have been born, not the day that she died. It was almost like the universe was just laughing at me, at least in my opinion. It was like, God damn, the water broke. If this was another situation, this would have been a happy day. I would have had her today. But instead, it just wasn't in the cards. It just wasn't for me. And by this point, everyone just had to leave, and they had to get back to their lives, and it was just me and my husband, and all we were left was his mom and his aunts. They were the ones who stayed the longest. They were going to sit there and wait until we delivered this baby so they can hold her. So remember, it was noon by the time I was admitted into the hospital. It was 10:55 p.m. when they finally cut me open and performed the C-section. It's a long time to wait to hold my baby girl. And I'm just thinking about that OR, and they give you the epidural on the back so they can do the C-section, and everything was just kind of a blur, just motionless, a zombie at this point. And the whole time, the anesthesiologist was giving me a special cocktail of drugs to keep me there in a good place, because all I felt was pain. It wasn't physical pain, but emotionally, I wasn't there anymore. Finally, once they got to the point where they were getting ready to pull her out, they had cut through everything. Normally, the father is allowed to stand up and watch the baby come out. When it was time, my husband just stood up because he wanted to see what was happening. And I just remember the anesthesiologist put his hand on his shoulder and said, "Sit down, buddy." And they pulled her out. I could see a baby. I could see my baby being cleaned off by the nurses in the back. But the one thing that didn't happen was her crying, and it was just silence. That silence to me was the most deafening thing, but it really dashed any hope that they could save her. That maybe they were wrong. They they gave her to Rich, and they start, putting me back together. And I just see him holding her, just smiling at her. And all I saw was all the moments that he'll never have with her. That's all I saw. I saw that he'll never get to walk her down the aisle, never get to dance with her. He'll never get to do all those fatherly things that comes with having a daughter. And that's all I could see. And I remember he tried to show her to me. And I just couldn't. I couldn't do it. I couldn't hold her. And I just felt so numb as I'm watching all these moments gone. Moments we'll never have with her. Apparently the cord was wrapped around her neck. Strangled her. And part of my diabetes made her gain 2 pounds in 3 days, which also led to that. That's what went wrong. It probably wasn't until after I was put back in my hospital room that I held her for the first time, because I was just between the pain of the C-section and the emotional roller coaster that I was on and all the drugs that the anesthesiologist gave me. I was just out. I was just not functioning. But I remember it was dark. The lights were off. It must have been like 1 a.m. at this point. I see Rich is still awake. He's just holding her. So I motion for him, and he brings her over to me. He puts her in my arms. I held her for the first time. I just remember looking into her face, just wishing she would open her eyes. Just once. Just wanted to see her eyes. And I just buried my face into her face, and I cried. And that was the beginning of the floodgates for me. I knew in that moment that no matter how much I begged, how much I pleaded, how much I prayed for her to open her eyes, I knew there was no